Hello and welcome back to another episode of Teaching My Dad Football. The second ever episode of this podcast that we're doing.
Yeah, it is the second, and I'm the dad. And in fact, I already forgotten what we said during the first podcast because I'm known to have a very bad memory.
That's sort of the premise of this podcast, is at least trying to get you to understand football a little bit better, because his memory is not particularly good.
Well, yeah, it's a bit, I got failures.
Yeah, which to the people who listened to the first podcast, you may have gathered by now. To anyone new here, welcome. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on whatever streaming service you use, welcome. Just for a little bit of a run through about what we're doing on this podcast and in future podcasts. We're going to be doing this sort of every Monday or Tuesday after a game week has been played in the Premier League. We're going to talk about the games, mainly Arsenal games. For those of you who don't know, we're both big Arsenal fans, as to those watching YouTube can tell by our shirts. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We went to the game yesterday, which we will get onto very soon. But yeah, we're going to be going through the Premier League games, talking about the results, talking about the games, mainly Arsenal, but everyone else. And then also at the end, going to do some Premier League predictions for the next game week. Although, albeit at the time of recording this, there's no games this weekend because we're going into an international break now. But we'll talk about the games that will happen in 2 weeks' time now.
And as you said, the purpose of the podcast, in fact, the purpose of two of us speaking, it just happens that we're recording ourselves, is for you who know a lot, dear Joe,
I know a bit.
to teach me, Emmy, your dad, a little bit more about football, because I'm not very good at that.
You've not got the best ball knowledge out there, to say the least.
Enough.
But anyways, with that, we will get into today's topics. Well, I think it's no better than start it off with the big game of the weekend, which was Arsenal City.
Yeah.
4:30 p.m. on a Sunday. It was a big one for us, obviously.
Remind me why it was such a big game, because it's not just about us trying to stay top of the league, although, with Tottenham this time round. But why was it so special to try and get a win this time round?
Well, it was special because it's been so long since we've beaten City in the league. I mean, the last time we beat them in the league was at home at the end of 2015, the 15-16 season, A lot has changed since then. I mean, it was almost 8 years. I think it was December 2015, last time we beat them in the league. And since then, I think we then had a couple draws after that. But I think we drew away to them later on in the season. But I think since Pep's been there, I believe we've lost every single game to them.
Yeah, including, let's not...
Because it was 12 games. No, did we... I was just wondering if in Pep's first season, if we drew or if we drew to them.
Anyway, but the history is...
It'd been a while. It's been a while.
And it was...
We played them in cup competitions a couple of times and we've beaten them. But beyond that, in the league, no.
Yeah. But anyway, so what did you make of the game?
Well, for the most part, the game was pretty boring, I actually think. I mean, as a fan, you're there and, you're on the edge of your seat because it's a big game. It was 0-0 for pretty much all the game. And you just think any moment could change it, which there was a moment that changed the complexion of the game and the result in the end. But we'll get onto that one later. But not much happened. It was one of those very tactical games where it seemed like both managers were both more so waiting for the other one to react or on the pitch for a player to make a mistake rather than to try and like really break each other down on the pitch. And you can see that with the attacking is that it didn't really get that many numbers forward. Bar set pieces, didn't really see the fullbacks join in the attacks that often. I know Zinchenko started, he likes to invert, so he doesn't really tend to get forward that much. And Ben White, who you usually see overlapping a lot, seemed quite conservative with that in the game. He seemed like, I'm not going to push up as much as I usually would do, because otherwise that leaves a lot of space on that side of the pitch for them to exploit. But there wasn't much width in the game either, which meant a lot of the game was played down the middle of the pitches. I mean, if you look at the lineups for both sides, you had, for Arsenal, Jesus was really the only one providing width, at least in the first half, was the only one really providing width. But he's one of those players who likes receiving the ball to feet rather than sort of making runs in behind. Didn't really stretch their defence. Didn't really ever make those runs from the wing, making a darting diagonal run, for someone to maybe play a through ball. He's getting the ball into feet a lot, which did help us a lot in times because the ball would go long to him and it became a target for us to go long to when we couldn't go short, because he was sort of our only real long option. And he was having he had a good game, Jesus, I think.
I think he played quite well. I think it's possibly considering one of the best games.
Considering playing on the right hand side, which I don't know how many times he's done for Arsenal, but he definitely hasn't done it much. Playing on that right hand side, I know recently he's played a little bit on the left, but at least on that right, I mean, Saka starts there basically every single game. In fact, it was his first game he hadn't appeared in the Premier League in 87 games. The run, it's insane, but eventually that was gonna come to an end.
So do you think that, because you said, and I agree with you that, both teams were really waiting for the other to make a mistake that was, that were all very careful, which meant in reality for Arsenal being really good in defence because they're quite impressive.
Oh, yeah, defensively they were... both teams were pretty good defensively, albeit I think that was in part because of the lack of commitment to going forward from both sides. But at least from an Arsenal side, Saliba and Gabriel were brick walls yesterday. They were shut everything out. Haaland didn't have a look in. There was Haaland, he's 6'4", 6'5". He's built like a brick, and Saliba, manhandled him yesterday. There was one ball where it played over the top, and they try to go shoulder to shoulder. Saliba barges him off, shoulder to shoulder, and Haaland goes to the floor, and Saliba just carries on running. And I think that kind of just summed up yesterday. And it's not the first game that... Actually, this game and the previous game when we played them in the Shield, Haaland in both games accumulated an XG of 0. He didn't have a shot throughout the entire time that he was on the pitch. And I know he came off slightly early in the Community Shield, but in this game he played the full 90. And he didn't have a look in. Not one.
So you would agree? I've seen some some other commentators have said that clearly the way that Arsenal defended and played was down to very careful strategy from Arteta, who decided that the best way to beat City this time round was really to somewhat play a more careful game rather than be a bit more gung-ho against them, which is the trap that we've maybe fallen for in the past, is that as soon as you commit a lot of bodies forward, they'll just exploit you in behind. They'll wait, they'll bide their time. And that's the thing about City over the past few years especially. Pep has become more... I know we always think of Pep as this super possession, obviously possession and control-based manager, but defensively, the City side, especially last season and towards the back end of the season, just became so impossible to penetrate, because they'll essentially be like, if you want to attack us, good luck. Like, good luck breaking through us.
Like it's going to take something special or a little bit of luck for you to break through us. Especially against the big teams, they're actually now quite happy to let other teams have more possession of the ball, and you kind of saw that with them with a number of times last year. I mean, when we played them at the Emirates last season, it was their lowest percentage of possession in the league since Pepper came in. I think they had something like 36% possession. I mean, yesterday it was a bit more balanced. I think it was City had 51, Arsenal had 49, but you could see it was very balanced in terms of possession. Although I do think that maybe they were a little bit more possession based this time round because Arsenal were willing to defend at times. They were willing to sort of just sit back and absorb pressure. 11 men behind the ball, almost just parking the bus at times. But at the end of the day, you can struggle to break through that, which they did. I mean, their only shot on goal came from that corner in the first few minutes of the game where the corner came in. I can't remember who had the header, but it was cleared off the line by Declan Rice. And that was their only shot on target the entire game. They had 4 shots in total the entire game.
Yeah, and as you said, it was quite, from an Arsenal perspective, being there at the stadium, but I guess everyone else also daily watching it or listening on, online, just the audio, any streaming service. It was quite worrying and frustrating because of we're defending so well. That was not a great real deal.
No, there was no real chances in the game
happening, and I got very worried at the start of the game because Ryan made a few.
Yeah,
a few mistakes.
Ryan made a couple of.
And I don't know whether it was
defensive
intentional to make sure that they played that way with holding the ball through to the end.
I mean, obviously it's intentional that you play out from the back like that, but you're trying to entice City on with their press, but that he almost got caught out a couple of times. He misplaced a couple. I know midweek he had the mistake against Lens for their first goal. So you're just thinking, okay, how do you bounce back from that? And those first sort of 15, 20 minutes, he looked shaky. He didn't look confident on the ball. And, a couple misplaced passes. And then that one with Alvarez, where the ball gets... Gabriel plays the ball back across Raya, sort of tries to open his body up. But at that point, Alvarez just comes speeding in. Raya tries to clear it. Alvarez blocks it, and on another day that could go in the back of the net. To be fair, from that point onwards, he seemed to sort of like snap back and really sharpened up. And to be fair, I think his distribution after that was almost perfect. But for those first 15 to 20 minutes, he looked shaky, and on another day we could have gone 1-0 down.
Do you think it was because maybe he was worried because such a big game and he,
Yeah, probably the stakes. He's... In terms of a game like that, he never played in a game of that magnitude before. I mean, I know he's played some... Obviously, I know he played in the North London derby, but, against City, best team in the world, and you're the team fighting them, you're the team trying to dethrone them. He's never been in that position before, although obviously he's played against them several times for Brentford, and been on the winning side with them, with Brentford against City. Doing it in the position of Way or Arsenal is a bit different.
So what do you think, if anything, led us to the change and us being able to score a goal? Because obviously that somewhat relates to some of the subs that were made.
Well, the interesting thing about the subs is that they were... All 4 of them were involved in the goal. And in all honesty, I think it was a tactical bit of masterclass from Arteta, because towards sort of the last 25, 30 minutes of the game, he realises that having sort of this static issue again, aren't we?
Yeah.
Don't know what the issue is there, but sounds a little bit better now.
Yeah.
Try unplugging stuff. I don't know if that will help. Sounds a little bit better.
We'll soon figure out. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyways, where was I?
So we're saying subs.
Oh yeah, the
four subs,
substitutions. Yeah, I mean, like perfect from Arteta, really. I mean, kind of more seemed almost like a little bit of a reaction to Pep made that triple change beforehand, where he took he took off Alvarez, Kovacic, who I think we all agree should have been red. If it's not a given the basis of the red cards that have been given this season, whether the Curtis Jones one, the Malagusto one, Kovacic met all the criteria to be sent off. You know, studs high, enough force in the challenge, ankle level. Reality is that the VAR team could have easily said to Michael Oliver, okay, go over to the monitor and have a look. And I think if he saw it back, he might have changed his mind on it. They didn't send him over to the monitor. Okay, whatever. He gives a yellow card. Sometimes that can happen, you know, where you give a yellow. I can forgive him on the pitch in that moment for not giving a red. The VAR should do their job, didn't do their job. But then about 5 minutes later, Kovacic slides in late on Declan Rice. It's a yellow card challenge, that one, against Declan Rice, but Michael Oliver doesn't pull the second yellow out. And he should have, but he bottled it. Now, I've seen some things online which are a little bit interesting, to say the least, about Michael Oliver. One of them being is that he is employed by the UAE like Football League or whatever, which is run by none other, funnily enough, than Sheikh Mansour, the owner of Manchester City. The two of the biggest board members at City are employers of Michael Oliver, and so now I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but he shouldn't really have been allowed to referee in that game if he's being paid by the owners of Manchester City. Then he probably shouldn't have been refereeing the game.
Yeah, but definitely so. In order to avoid, any suspicions, I agree with you that there is potential conflict of interest, and
it's just like any potential
he
conflict of interest.
He should have requested. Look, I think in order to avoid, that there are issues within the game, and then there are allegations. I'd rather not be the ref for for this match.
Well, it shouldn't be him to make that decision. It should be Picho Moel.
Yeah.
Says there, look, you referee in this league, you're paid by the owners of Manchester City. There shouldn't be a world in which you then are able to referee that game. Like, you shouldn't be involved in any Man City games, because essentially at the end of the day, your bosses are the owners of Manchester City. And if you do anything, you can imagine if he makes any decisions that the City bosses don't particularly like, he might get a phone call about it.
Well, I'm sure that that.
So it might have been.
Sure that may not be.
Mind,
I'm pretty sure that is not happening. But the reality is that the perception of of what is happening then leads to having conversations. Look, can I really trust them? For anything. But I agree with you. Overall, the decision wasn't great. Her VAR didn't help either.
No, not at all.
And it should have been a red card. Whether that would have,
whether
it would have changed the game or not.
Maybe I can understand from the perspective of with the first one, it was because the VAR team didn't see it as enough of a clear and obvious error for them to get themselves involved and essentially referee the room from the VAR office. Whatever, understand that. If that is their reasoning for it, I can kind of understand it. But I mean, he has to get sent off for the second one. If the first one isn't a red, then he has to get a second yellow. And a lot of people will forget about. A lot of Arsenal fans will forget about it because we won the game, and you can say justice was served as a result. But if it if we had drawn or if we'd lost the game, then the talking point would have been Kovacic should have been sent off, Arsenal would have been possibly robbed, and that would have been the talking point. But because of it, we're talking about it now, but we're maybe not got the same.
Well,
we're not angry about it in the same way because we won the game.
Well, thankfully, it's because it's late too. And what do you think would have happened had he been sent off? Do you think the game would have changed?
I mean, yeah, for sure it would have changed. I mean, at that point, I think City would have become even more defensive. They would have had to have taken one of their front players off in order to compensate for not having someone like Kovacic. But I mean, the game would have changed irregardless. But I mean, there's an argument that you can make that if they went down to 10 men, they would have been defending 10 men the entire game, wouldn't have had maybe much possession of the ball, and it could have become an even more boring game because they probably would have just sat in a low block the entire time. But
so we'll never know. So
we'll never know.
He could still finish as with a draw.
It could have finished as a nil. In fact, it very easily could have finished as a 0-0 draw, but it didn't. But to get back to the original point about the substitutions, about all four of them being involved, because I was talking about Kovacic being pulled off the pitch. I can't remember who else was pulled off. It was Stones, Doku, and Mateus Nunes who came on. It was Alvarez. Rico Lewis. Maybe it was Rico Lewis came off as well. And as soon as that happened, you see Arteta call over Tomiyasu, Havertz, and Thomas Partey to come on the pitch. And at that point, I think it's almost in his realisation of we need to go a little bit more physical here now. And the three players he takes off are Nketiah, Jorginho, and Zinchenko. Now, the Zinchenko one, I think, was in part due to Doku coming on the pitch, being a really direct winger. Zinchenko maybe not the best defensively for that. And so as soon as Tomiyasu comes on the pitch, Doku had originally come on the pitch and was playing on the right-hand side, switched with Foden and went to the left-hand side because they realised Tomiyasu's far too good of a one-on-one defender, and Doku would have maybe Ben White's not as strong as a one-on-one defender against, tricky, pacey wingers. And so Doku instantly goes to the left-hand side, and that means that all of a sudden Tomiyasu's defending Foden. Now, Foden was playing very centrally in the game, and what it means is that Tomiyasu then has almost the freedom to roam forward a little bit more. And if you there's a freeze frame where you see the pitch of when Partey gets on the ball, sort of on that right-hand side, sort of near the halfway line. Tomiyasu is actually further up the pit, further up than Foden is deep, and so from a defensive standpoint, Foden's on the wrong side of him. But you could almost think that maybe he was there because for the entire game he was playing with Zinchenko, playing the ball in front of him. Zinchenko's not going to make that run because he knows he doesn't have the height or the physicality to win a header there if the ball's floated up above. But Tomiyasu's 6'2", 6'3", and all of a sudden he notices, he checks Foden, he sees that he's on the right side of him, and he makes that run forward, and all of a sudden Partey, rather than playing the ball short into feet, goes over the top. Tomiyasu, at that point, making that forward run, and because Foden's late, Kyle Walker has to come over to try and cover the space that Tomiyasu, because he can't leave that space open because if Kyle Walker doesn't come over, then Tomiyasu has the ability to bring the ball down. So Kyle Walker has to then cover that space so that Tomiyasu can't play the ball down. He has to play a header. Kai Havertz drifts into the space really well. Tomiyasu plays a perfect header into Kai Havertz's feet. And Martinelli, who stayed wide all the time, then drifted in towards the edge of the box, sort of with Kyle Walker not being able to see that he was there. Kai Havertz lays it off. Martinelli takes a shot. Stroke of luck. Takes a big deflection off Ake. It was going in, but I mean, by the looks of it, I think Edison would have saved it. But in those big games, sometimes a deflection is all you need. A bit of a stroke of luck. And was an 86th minute winner. Funnily enough, I saw a post of being really similar. I don't know if you remember, Arteta scored a late winner against City at the Emirates at home. You know what? If I tell you where we were in Calgary at the time. We were watching it on TV. He hits that. It was 0-0. It was maybe about 12 years ago, and he hits a shot from quite long range. If I showed you the goal, you might remember it.
Oh, it's all right. Yeah, we'll watch it
But
later.
Arteta scored that on 86 minutes and 1 second. And funnily enough, Martinelli's is almost the exact same. It's 85 minutes and 57 seconds.
Right.
So 4 seconds difference between the two winners, both outside the box. Albeit the Arteta one was a better goal because of its didn't take a deflection on the way in. But as a fan, you don't care about that.
Yeah, and I think, then going back to the goal, what I think did help Arsenal is that the goal came right towards the end of the game.
Well, essentially,
and there
it
was
gave
not
City
not
no
enough,
time
and there was not enough
to react.
extra time for City to
Yeah, I mean,
push
because the game then restarted at 87 and a half minutes, and at that point you got 2.5 minutes and then 4 minutes of injury time. And the final whistle then went. It basically gives City no time. And actually, in those 6.5 minutes, City didn't do anything. I don't even know if they got into our box in that time period. They got in and around our box, but didn't get. I don't think they got a shot off in those final 6 minutes. I mean, they only have 4 shots in the entire game, 2 of which were very early in the game off that corner. Where Declan Rice clears it off the line, and it then comes back into Ake, who then sort of blasts it over the bar. And that's 2 shots, and that was their only shot on target in the game came through that phase of play, and one of their only other shots also came through that same phase of play. So defensively, it's probably the best defensive game I've seen Arsenal play.
Yeah, that was very good. It was solid.
For also our first home clean sheet in the league this season, because every other home game we've played, we've conceded in the league. So to get a clean sheet against City, who notoriously put the ball in the back of the net against us, is something for those players to be proud of. Now, I've noticed we have been speaking about the Arsenal game for quite a while now. So we will move on to some of the other games. Obviously, it was the big game.
It's only fair.
It was the big game of the weekend. We were there, albeit we weren't sat in the same part of the stadium. I was sat in our regular seats. You were sat
I was just above the City.
above the City fans, which I imagine was very enjoyable for you to.
At the end, it was very enjoyable. I won't be saying what, because
we'll keep it PG. I don't think we'll be saying
what people and the kind of
gestures they were making
they were doing at the end of the game
fans,
with the City fans. But
I'm sure if you've ever watched a football game, an English football game, you'd probably know what sort of gestures people were making towards the City fans as the game ended.
So which game do you wanna go into now?
So next up, I think we'll go with the game that was just before one of the games that was just before our one, the Brighton-Liverpool game. 2-2. From a neutral perspective, a lot better of a game than our game on the Super Sunday. A game in which I think it was pretty evenly balanced. An entertaining game nonetheless. I mean, I didn't sort of watch in parts at the stadium. They had it on, but Brighton obviously take the lead quite early on. Their goal came from sort of a slow ball into McAllister, which then one of their new boys picked up.
Right, and in any case,
Picked up and he scored. Hold on, let me check the name.
do you want to check the name, because otherwise,
I checked the name here of the scorers. I mean, I know Salah got the brace, but at least for Brighton.
But it was, in general term, as you said, was when they.
Oh yeah, Adingra. Adingra gets the ball. He gets the ball. He picks McAllister's pocket, notices Allison's off his line, and from about 35 yards out, he decides to almost. To be fair, he didn't lift it off the ground. He didn't lift it over Allison. He actually just sort of passed it into the net. But Allison was sort of quite wide of his goal at that point, and the space was there for him to take that shot, and he went in the back of the net. Then Brighton had some chance. Well, they had some chance. There were quite a few good chances before that goal off of a few corners, but then after that, the game sort of slowed down a little bit, and then eventually the space opens up for Liverpool. Salah gets the equaliser, and Brighton at this point on the back foot. Then the space opens up again, and they draw the foul for the penalty just before half time, and Salah dispatches it, and they go 2-1 up going into the half. And you're thinking, if Liverpool can hold out here, it'll be a great result for them. Against a Brighton team that have had a very good start to the season, bar a couple of results. They're one of those teams that's capable of almost beating any team on their day, but they're also very capable of having heavy defeats. At Villa, obviously they lost 6-1. So to get a good result against a Liverpool side, will be good for them, that they didn't capitulate at the back. On the balance of it, I think a draw is probably the fair result in the end. Both teams created enough chances to. I mean, the game could have probably gone either way, but in all fairness, I think the draw was probably.
And do you think that
the right
that
one in the end.
happened? Because I've heard some people saying, because this is like Liverpool, the new version of they got the new players and they got their legs and they're fast,
sort of
but they
Liverpool
are very good in attack, but they are
not so great
defensively. Is that?
Yeah.
Do you think what is happening?
Yeah, I think it's almost exactly that. I mean, the Liverpool teams are past you, when they were challenging City and winning the Champions League and getting to finals. Defensively, they were very strong, but they don't have that protection in front of them. I mean, they didn't start this game with a DM starting. Their only real defensive midfielder is Endo, who they signed in the summer, who was a bit of a stopgap signing after they missed out on Caicedo and Romeo Lavia, who both went to Chelsea, of course. But they don't have that protection in front of them. And then defensively, Van Dijk's, since his ACL injury, while still a top defender, isn't at the levels that he used to be. He's getting older as well now, so maybe that physicality that he used to have isn't quite there anymore.
Do you think that, because obviously it's something that Klopp be aware and he's going to work on it. And do you see Liverpool being a challenger for?
I don't know how long
the title.
I don't know how long they can sustain it, because as good as they are going forward, I mean, they are brilliant going forward. They're arguably one of the best teams in the world going forward. Their defense is just not quite at the levels that it needs to be, and over the course of a league season, you need your defense to be there, because there will be games where, for whatever reason, the attackers, as good as they are, just are struggling to break through the lines or can't put the ball in the back of the net and whatnot. And in those sorts of games, you need your defense to be there in order to, hold out for a result, or you've only gone 1-0 up, or it's a big game and you're playing against a side that's very good attacking wise. If the side they're going up against is great defensively and great attacking wise, whereas Liverpool are good defensively, great attacking wise, they'll get exposed in some games, and it'll be the difference of them dropping some points here and there, and especially against Brighton, a good side, they do eventually drop points. Especially defending set pieces, they really struggled to defend some set pieces against Brighton. I mean, they had those first few chances that Brighton had where they could have scored in the first sort of 5 minutes of the game off some corners, and then eventually the equaliser comes from a ball, from a free kick whipped in off the left-hand side, and Lewis Dunk, the captain, centre-back, sticks it in the back of the net. And from a defensive standpoint, Liverpool will be kicking themselves for that, because you should be defending set pieces like that better.
So, just and then we can move on to another game. But so, question for you: is Brighton going to make to top four, and is Liverpool going to make it to top four?
Well, I think Liverpool are almost a guarantee. Liverpool will get Champions League football again. The question is whether they'll challenge for the title again. That I'm not so sure about. I'll have to see their defense improve in order for me to be confident in them saying that they'll make a good bid for the title. Top four, I don't really have much question about. I mean, it might even be a top five this year with the change of the format of the Champions League, depending on how English sides do in European competitions. If they're the best, if English league sides are the best performing teams in Europe, all of a sudden there's a fifth spot becomes Champions League football, and if that's the case, then yeah, they'll easily get Champions League football.
What about Brighton?
I mean, Brighton, if they got Champions League football, will be incredible. Do I think they'll do it? No, I don't think they have. Similar to Liverpool, but their defense isn't good enough, and then their attack isn't quite potent enough. They'll make a very good push for European football again, though. But again, they have had midweek games which they're getting used to as well. They've lost one, drawn one in their Europa League group so far. Albeit they did get a great draw away at Marseille. Tough stadium and place to go. They went 2-0 down and they kept themselves in it, and eventually got themselves back into it and leveled it up quite late on with a penalty. But Champions League football, I think, is a bit of a long shot for them. But yeah, it'd be one of those ones where at this point in the season, I think they're sat in fifth right now. No, they're either sat in. I'm trying to think teams above them. They're either sat in fifth. I think they're sat in sixth right now, which would get them Europa League football again. But there are some teams who need to do some catching up, who we'll get onto in a bit, that I would expect will eventually finish above them, and then also probably finish above Villa as well. Which I think moves us on to our next game of the other Sunday games, which is the West Ham Newcastle game, 2-2 again. I mean, from what I've seen, Bruno Guimaraes very lucky to be on the pitch still. Got booked once for a yellow card, and then a couple minutes later makes another foul. James Ward-Prowse on the break tripped him up. Should have been a second yellow, yes. And by the letter of the law, he should have been sent off. And Newcastle were lucky, but in all fairness to them, they got themselves back in the game after a really poor first half. I mean, it looked like they were hung up on midweek. Obviously, that brilliant game at home against PSG, where they blow the doors off of them and they beat them 4-1. They had a really slow start in the first half. They go 1-0 down at half time. Albeit West Ham didn't really create that much, bar the goal that they scored, but Newcastle just didn't look at it. Obviously, Eddie Howe came in at half time, said something to them. They come out the second half, and all of a sudden you can see the players are getting forward a lot more. They're getting themselves up the pitch, and in the first few minutes they create some good chances. And eventually, Isak scores the equaliser, and then not too long after that, I think about 3 or 4 minutes after that, ball goes over the top to Trippier, who then plays a brilliant volleyed cross across the goal. Poor defending from West Ham, in all fairness, but Isak has a tap in at that point. They go 2-1 up, and Newcastle looked in the driving seat. Isak goes through on goal again, takes it round the keeper, but his touch was just a little bit too heavy, and he from a quite tight, and then has to take the shot from quite a tight angle when it hits the post. and it could have been his hat trick, and they could have gone 3-1 up, and at that point you would have said game over. Newcastle would have won. Didn't end that way, and West Ham then bring on summer signing Mohamed Kudus quite late on, and I mean from the moment he came on the pitch, he just looked like something that West Ham haven't seen from a creative player since Dimitri Payet was there all those years ago. I mean, he's the real deal. I mean, I always rated him while he was still at Ajax. And in all fairness, I was a little bit surprised he actually went to West Ham. I thought he would have got a move to a bigger club, because there was lots of big clubs who were interested in him. I mean, United were interested in him. Chelsea showed a lot of interest in him. Arsenal were even interested in him. In fact, he almost then ended up going to Brighton, and then West Ham came in for him, and he chose West Ham over Brighton. But great player. He's very versatile as well. He could play on the wing, he could even play up front, but I think his sort of best position is playing as an attacking midfielder. And he came on, he created chances as soon as he came on, even coming on almost before 90, just before 90 minutes. I think it was like the 80. It wasn't until sort of well into the 80 minutes that he gets subbed on, and instantly has an impact on the game. And there was a statistic that West Ham only had 5 shots the entire game, and when he came on the pitch, they then had 3 shots from the moment that he came on for the last few minutes of the game. Scores a brilliant goal. Sort of just waited his time while sort of all the defenders are going back. The best thing you can do in football sometimes, an attacker, is just to either slow yourself down or even just stand still. Let everyone move in front of you, because then all the space opens up for in front of you if no one's marking you. Ball gets cut back to him on the edge of the box, sort of a volley into the ground, and sticks it in the back of the net, and the game then ends 2-2. Albeit that West Ham could have then also scored a winner right at the death, but Pope made a brilliant save from Jared Bowen, and it then he made a save, and it kind of pushes out towards Ben Rama, who maybe just wasn't expecting the save from Pope, and he just can't quite. He didn't make any connection with the ball, but he could have made connection with the ball, and it could have gone 3-2. But another entertaining game from that Sunday, albeit at times I think it was a little bit slow, but the game did burst into life, especially towards the end of the game when Kudus came on the pitch, and in the second half when Newcastle finally decided to turn it on a little bit more as well.
So what do you think, before we got to another game, there's just one question for these. So Newcastle likely to make it to a top 4 this season?
Well, top 4 or top 5, I think we need to be.
Yeah, well, top 4 or top 5. So do you think they...
Yeah, I think they'll push again. They're good enough. Again, it will be the midweek games that will be the possibility of catching them out. A lot of people didn't maybe give them the best of chances to get through their Champions League group, but if they're going to play like how they did at home against PSG, against then when they face Dortmund and Milan at home, they'll pick up enough points at home in that group to go through to the knockout stages as well. I mean, Newcastle currently sat in 8th, just behind West Ham, in fact. They're on 13 points, West Ham on 14. Now, Newcastle last year did have a bit of a slow start to the season as well. Now, the thing that you would say about them, though, is that, well, they had a bit of a slow start last season. They were drawing a lot of games, whereas this season, instead of drawing those games, they've been losing games, which they didn't do much of last season at all. They didn't lose many games at all. And that might be the midweek. That might be the thought of the Champions League games. And when those players are going for Champions League football, it's a little bit easier to pick yourself up. Whereas as soon as you get the Champions League football, oh, we're here now. You could almost think they look more forward to the Champions League games rather than the Premier League games. Chasing, trying to get themselves into the Champions League. The maintaining it is sometimes more difficult than getting in. And especially then when you've got midweek games and they don't have the particularly most deep squad. There'll be some tired legs out there, and I think you saw that on Sunday. They had some tired legs, and I think they're also just mentally fatigued as well from playing games. They've had some big games recently. They knocked City out midweek the other week in the League Cup. They then have their first Champions League home game against PSG, and they then have to pick themselves up again, go away to home against West Ham, who are pretty good at home this season, and they found it tough for sure. And that might be a theme that continues for them, but I would probably say that I don't know if they'll finish in the top 4, but they very well may get that 5th spot again and find themselves. And if the ping pong balls bounce right for them, they'll get in the Champions League again, because I think right now the current top 4 look very strong, and I'm not necessarily saying that any of those top 4. I think the current top 4 are probably the ones who end up finishing the top 4 come the end of the season.
And what about West Ham?
West Ham, I think a lot of people wrote them off. I think a lot of people thought, obviously, we got Declan Rice, and people are looking at their team now and thinking, such a big loss there. But they invested the money really well. They brought in some really good players, and they've looked strong again this season. Their midfield has looked a lot stronger because they have more numbers in there now. Almost becoming too reliant on a player like Declan Rice at times cannot be the right thing for a team like West Ham to do. They need a bit more balance, and they do have that in their midfield this year. They made some good signings.
Right. Yeah. And so you I guess that you see them again. Quite easily get in a Europa League place.
Yeah, I can see them pushing for Europe again. Whether it's Europa League, I'm not so sure. Obviously, they're in the Europa League this year again. Whether they they could go far in it. They went to the semi-finals of the Europa League the other season, a couple seasons ago, and obviously they won the Conference League last year. But whether they go deep in it again, I'm not so sure. Obviously, if they were to win it, they could find themselves in playing Champions League football. But I'm not so sure that they would win it, although they do have the experience of winning a European competition now. That team especially, it could happen. Do I think it will? No. Do I think they'll get European football? Maybe. But I think there's a couple teams above them that look a little bit stronger for European football, and then you've then got the likes of United and Chelsea, who will be looking to push back into that. Obviously, United and Chelsea both want to be playing Champions League football again. Whether they will, I'm not so sure. We'll get onto them in a bit with their games. In fact, actually, I think we'll go straight into the United game, because they won 2-1. Albeit they won 2-1 very, very late on, through 2 injury time goals by Scott McTominay, who not particularly loved at United, but I think after that game is probably the most loved man in Manchester.
Why is it not? Do you think it's not loved?
He's just. I think it's in part playing out position. He's not. Over the years they tried to play him as sort of more defensive midfielder. He's just not that. He's not a defensive midfielder. He doesn't play there for Scotland, and he plays very well for Scotland in a more advanced role. And I think his future in a more advanced role, if he starts to play more of as a number 8, more of as someone who's going to be involved in the attacks, he has the ability to score goals, and he has the legs to be able to play as a number 8, and I think that's the position he needs to play in. He doesn't have the greatest technical ability on the ball, but you don't necessarily always need that. Sometimes you need runners in your team. You need players who are going to pop up with goals here and there. And it could have been an awful. It's already been United's worst start to a Premier League season, but it could have been even worse. They were 1-0 down until the 93rd minute, and then they end up winning the game 2-1. Now they have a lot of players to come back, United, still, so I'm not making too much of a judgment on their start of the season, but it's not been great. The one thing that I did say going into the start of the season is that last year we saw United play a style of football that isn't Ten Hag's style. He played very pragmatic at times, played very defensive at times, and looked to hit on the counter a lot. Now Ten Hag's not that sort of manager. He's the sort of manager where he wants to be in possession of the ball, controlling games. I mean, that's what you saw at Bright. That's what you saw of him at Ajax. He was also then assistant to Pep at Bayern Munich. So if he is going to implement that style, I think you've seen him trying to implement that style a bit more this season, and they've had some growing pains for sure. And I think they'll continue to have some growing pains, especially until they get some players back.
Who do you think they're missing the most?
I mean, they're missing a lot of players out right now. I mean, their defence that they started against Brentford was... I mean, they're missing Luke Shaw still. Varane's out. Lissandro Martinez is out. They're missing a lot of their typical starting defenders. Their back line isn't the strongest right now. Then, Amrabat's still sort of trying to get to terms with integrating into the team. You've then got a youngster in Kobe Mainu out, who you may not have heard his name before, but in pre-season looked very good for them. Sort of as a youngster, you can see that he's confident on the ball, press resistant, can play on the half turn, which is something that they lack, and it's something they're really going to need if they're going to. If Ten Hag is really going to try to implement his style, he's going to need some players that can play on the half turn more, because players like Casemiro who, in all fairness, towards the end of his career now, has never had to play sort of a lot on the ball, but also receiving the ball with his back to his team and facing his own goal and turn a player and play a pass. He hasn't had to do that, and they need players who can do that if they're going to get to where Ten Hag wants them to be. So if he's going to continue playing the way that he wants them to play, I think they'll continue to have some growing pains this year. And I mean, this result is almost sort of a brush over. It's a paper over the cracks, really, of the issues that they've had. Yeah, they've won the game and they've got the 3 points on the board, which is the most important thing for them right now. Because I mean, they could have. If they don't score those 2 late goals, they lose the game, and they start the season on 9 points after 8 games, having won 3 and lost 5. It wouldn't have been much better had they drawn the game either. I mean, if McTominay gets that equaliser and they don't then score that late winner again, you're talking about 10 points. 3 wins, 1 draw, 4 losses. But the losses at home, especially, Old Trafford's normally a really difficult place to go, but they'd lost their 2 previous Premier League games at home. They'd also lost in the Champions League at home to Galatasaray. So you'd want for them, they'd be hoping that they can make Old Trafford that really difficult place to go again, and so far this season it hasn't been that. I'd expect that it gets better, or expect that it sort of returns to the mean so far this as it's been this season, and they'll hope that they can get enough points at home to get themselves back into a fight for Champions League football. But based off the start of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make it, because I think their teams above them will pick up. They've shot themselves in the foot with a bad start. It's because they'll have to play catch up now, and they'll have to hope essentially the teams above them drop enough points that they get themselves back into a race. Because if it is going to be top 4, I can't see them breaking back into that top 4 unless they really turn things around. If the 5th spot is there, then they have a bit more of an opportunity to get back in the Champions League. But there'll be a lot of competition for that 5th spot, I think.
And on last comment on this game, and I read somewhere, and I not watched enough of the Man U games, that some commentators saying that Rashford is not quite himself at the moment, and would you agree with that? And
yeah, I mean, he's not himself, but Rashford's sort of one of those players. He's a moments player. He pops up with a goal. He can be having an awful game, but he will make a run in behind the defence and he'll score, and it will flip the game on its head. And that's the only moment he needs in a game, is just to put the ball in the back of the net. he's not really the sort of player who's going to affect the game throughout the full 90. He's not that sort of type of winger in terms of like being on the ball and causing lots of problems. And especially his form recently in front of goal hasn't been good. He's looked to sort of lack confidence. Something that was highlighted by a number of people about him was that when he gets into positions near the goal, he usually shoots when maybe there was some positions where he should have been passing. And there's been a couple times now where he used to would have just taken the shot. Maybe he hesitates for half a second thinking, oh, is there a pass on? And it's enough time for the defenders to then catch up and try and make a block and make the shot more difficult for him, where before he would have just been sort of like almost tunnel visioned in and just shoot. He wouldn't maybe necessarily be looking for that pass. And it's a difficult thing, at his age to try and learn is to know where, his possible attacking players for a pass would be. But I'd expect him to regain some form again. I mean, there was a point in last season where he went through a real purple patch where he was scoring every single game. But if you looked into it a little bit more, you realise his performances weren't always there in the games, but he was just popping up with goals, and that's what they need. That's what they need him to do. But now that they've got a striker in Højlund, they have someone there who's going to contribute goals for them, and so far this season has contributed more goals for them. So he's going to need to learn how to play with Højlund next to him. And the question is then can he then realise, okay, I need to also now be a bit more of a provider as well for him as well, because last season they relied on me to score the goals a lot. This season they still need me to score goals, but they also need me to be a provider. Can he do that? We'll see. I mean, he's what, 26 years old now, so I mean, a player of his quality, you'd think he can do it, but the age-old saying of teaching an old dog new tricks isn't really a thing. And at his age, you do wonder if maybe he's just gone beyond that point of being able to learn a new aspect of the game. And the thing that I would say for him is just play how you were playing last season. The rest, you'll learn how to play with Højlund, and eventually you'll just know the sort of positions he wants to be in. You won't have to look up for him. You'll just know roughly where he'll be on the pitch. Just continue the way that you're playing and try and get yourself some goals and get your confidence back up again.
Right.
So, yeah.
So
I think that's enough on.
Yeah. So it's very
United.
good there. So what's the next game?
I mean, going through the results. I mean, some other games that were played at the weekend. Obviously, there was no.
Do you want to talk about Chelsea?
Yeah, I think we can talk about Chelsea because they had a very good result at the weekend, beating Burnley 4-1 away from home after going 1-0 down in the game. Chelsea look like they're starting to kick into gear. Their past couple of games, they've been scoring goals, and that's been the most important thing for them, because if you look at the underlying stats, they've actually won every single Premier League game on expected goals. They just have really struggled in front of goal. Now they've got a lot of young players, bar Sterling. They've got a lot of young players up top who they may continue to have some of those issues in some other games, but at least in this game they were on fire in front of goal. And despite even going 1-0 down, they didn't let it faze them, and they go on to win the game 4-1 with their equaliser, a little bit of luck through an own goal. But in the second half, I mean, they just dominated. They dominated Burnley, who I think are having a really tough time Company's having a really tough time to implement his style now, instead of being in the Championship last season, where they were the best team in the Championship last season and they were free scoring and playing against teams obviously not as good defensively and not as good going forward. The thing that they need to improve is their defensive ability, because you go 1-0 up at home against Chelsea, and at that point your defence has to be good enough to hang on. And they hung on for a while in the first half until, a little unlucky with the own goal. It can happen sometimes, whatever. You take those, you accept those, they can happen. But in the second half, they just got exposed, and maybe trying to tried to go back into the lead. They left themselves open at the back, and Chelsea exploited it, and they end up scoring 3 goals in the second half, and they win 4-1, which for them is a great result. I mean, they seem to be a little bit back on track. I mean, they've won 2 games in a row now. They'll find themselves climbing up the table quite quickly at this stage in the season with 2 wins in a row. I mean, a few weeks ago we were looking at them down in like 14th, 15th on only 5 points, and now all of a sudden they're sat in 11th place on 11 points and find themselves only 5 points off 5th spot, which for them they'll see as a positive, because the top 4 teams I think pick up enough points that maybe even at this point in the season 6 points that Chelsea would have to go on a really good run to find themselves in top 4, but at least for that 5th spot, which will be probably where they're aiming for, is Champions League football, especially this season. They seem to be a little bit more back on track now. They have got some tough games coming up, and that'll be the question, is how do they get through the next sort of 5 or 6 games for them, because fixtures for Chelsea coming up, they have got after the international break, we've got them away. They've then got to play Brentford at home. They've then got to go to Spurs away. They've then got City at home, Newcastle away, Brighton at home, and then United away. So they got some tough games.
But so the next.
Is that the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games for them are really difficult, and it will define their season.
Yeah.
If they get through that and they win some of those games, they pick up points. They don't really, and if they maybe only lose 1 or 2, they could find themselves in a race for Champions League football. On the other hand, if they struggle in those games and they lose those games, and they lose a number of those games, and only pick up like 1 or 2 wins, then I think you'll find out about this team and you'll say, okay, I don't think you're going to make Champions League football this year, but you're going in the right direction. And they do seem to be going in the right direction under Pochettino now, with the way that they're playing, creating enough chances to win games that they've been playing. They just haven't been able to stick the ball in the back of the net up until these past couple of games. Now, will that continue, or will it regress to what it was before? We'll find out and see. But they're going to have some real defensive tests coming up.
Yeah, but your expectations are, they're improving a lot, and so maybe.
I mean, they've got a young squad. If you were to ask me whether I think they get Champions League football, my answer to that would be no. Do I think they could make a challenge for it? Possibly. Do I think they'll? But at this point in time, I'm still a little bit unsure about them. If you ask me in 4 or 5 games time what I think about them, I think I'll have a bit more of a clear picture, and I'll be able to tell you whether I think they'll go forward and they'll challenge for a Champions League spot, or whether they still need a bit more time to learn, to especially in front of goal to score some goals, because they're struggling in front of goals so far this season.
Right.
So this game could be an anomaly for that, albeit against a Burnley side who defensively are very weak. Against some better defensive side, they might struggle a bit more. And then, against teams who are better attacking wise, they may also struggle at the back as well. So that would be the question for them. Burnley, as for the other hand, they're going to have to learn quickly how to defend in the Premier League, because they're struggling to defend. And if they don't learn quickly, either Company will be out of job, or they'll stick with him for long enough. He won't try and change them to be a bit more pragmatic this season, and they'll go straight back down to the Championship, which I think would be, for them would be a shame. I think a lot of people saw the way that they played last season, rated Company highly, and thought, they'll come up to the Premier League and maybe they'll play their football quite well. Maybe, I think a lot of people had them comfortably staying up. I maybe fell in for the trap of a lot of other people's opinions, but I was thinking at first they could struggle. I mean, not many teams come up straight from the Premier League, straight into the Premier League from the Championship, play their football and stay up. I think the only team in recent memory who has played football, like a bit more expansive football, and has done pretty well in their first season was Leeds a number of seasons ago. But Leeds were almost a bit of an anomaly in that, in a manager like they had Bielsa, they had some real quality in that team that season as well with Calvin Phillips. Bamford, for that year in the Premier League, his only season in which he was actually scoring a lot of goals, but they also had a lot of other quality in the team, and Rodrigo, Rafinha, who have both moved on now. Rafinha you now see at Barcelona, and Calvin Phillips, although struggles at City, has been a starter for England in the past number of years, and they were almost too good of a championship side. They came up to the Prem and were able to implement their style and were able to play pretty good football. But it didn't quite last. But for other teams, trying to come up from the championship and play play the same style of football, such a difficult thing to do. And if they keep on playing the way that they're playing, if Company persists with the way that they're playing, they're going to struggle for sure. And they'll find them. I mean, they're in the relegation. They're in the relegation zone now, although they did beat Luton midweek, because that game, which was originally postponed, did get played, and they did go to Luton and win, which was massive for them to get their first 3 points on the board.
But as you said,
they're going to struggle. And I think now, talking about Luton, we'll move on to their game, which was against Spurs. Spurs away to Luton. Actually, a game that Luton could have got some points out of. They had some good chances, especially at 0-0 still, when Basuma went down off the pitch because he got himself red carded for a second yellow, which was, he picks up his first yellow, fair enough. He then dives and get himself his second yellow. I mean, from a Tottenham perspective, he's been one of the best. From their perspective, he's been one of their best players this season. In fact, I'd argue he's probably been, alongside Maddison and Son, been their best player this season. And get himself sent off is the worst thing you can do, because now he misses a game for them in the Premier League, which will be interesting to see, because I think they're in a position in which if they lose even one of their players in certain positions right now, they completely collapse, because they have no one else who can play how Basuma does. There's no one else in that team who can play to the level that Basuma does. Now, they could play with Højbjerg there, who is a really good player, but he's not the player that Basuma is. Now, as for the game, after they went down to 10 men, Luton did have some chances. There was one ball in the second half. It was cut across the back post. Adebayo at the back post. Should have been put it in the back of the net. Doesn't put it in the back of the net. And eventually, Spurs, push on. They get a corner. Pretty well worked set piece. And Maddison rolls it across to Van de Ven, who actually finishes pretty well for a centre-back, more of a forwards finish. And they end up winning the game. They hold out and they win 1-0. But for Luton, that was an opportunity for them. Right. And there won't be too many opportunities for them this season. I mean, they've had a brilliant win away against Everton the previous weekend. And then you would have been hoping midweek they're at home against Burnley. Can you pick up some point? Can you pick up 3 points here? That's going to be two teams who are fighting down at the bottom. And if they picked up 3 points, all of a sudden they would have created a bit of a gap between them and the bottom teams, and that can be enough sometimes just to sort of hold yourself out for a bit. Because then if you pick up some more points here and there, it will take one of those bottom teams to have to catch up to you. That one of those bottom sides will have to win some games in order to catch up to you in terms of points. So it was an opportunity missed for them midweek, and it was another opportunity missed for them this weekend. Now, they are just sitting in 17th spot, just above the relegation zone, albeit only on goal difference over Burnley. But it's a crazy thing to say, but there's a chance they stay up. There's a real chance that they stay up, because there's 3 teams below them currently in Burnley, and then also Bournemouth and Sheffield United, who we'll get onto in a little bit, who are not great this season, and they could just stay up, which I think would be a miracle if they do. They could just stay up because the teams below them are worse.
Right.
Not to sound too... I don't want to sound like I'm dissing them, but that's sometimes what it is. Down at the bottom is that you don't almost stay up because of the quality you have, but almost because of the lack of quality of the other teams, and because they don't pick up enough points. And you just about pick up enough points in some games to keep yourselves up. But Whether that happens, I don't know.
Well, we'll have to wait and
We'll
see
have
a
to
little
wait
bit
and
more.
see. I think it will be really interesting, that Boston fight. I think those are the 4 teams that I think will find themselves in a relegation scrap. I think Everton will be okay though, who I think we'll get onto now, who played against Bournemouth at home, and Bournemouth looked deject of ideas under their new coach. They're defensively pretty weak, and Everton just brushed them aside, really. They won the game 3-0. Pretty comfortable in the end for Everton. And yeah, Everton, I think, they've got a good enough home crowd, and they can be a tough place to go to, although, albeit that was their first home win of the season in the league. But if Goodison Park performs how it usually does, they'll be fine because they'll get enough points at home to stay up this season again. And again, in part, that's because the teams below them are just not good enough. And you saw that in Bournemouth. I mean, you would have been hoping for Bournemouth, game away at Everton, they haven't won a game at home yet. If you can get on the front foot a little bit early, get an early goal, all of a sudden those nerves start to creep back in, but they just didn't really have any threat, Bournemouth, and
Right, so your
Everton found it very comfortable in the end.
Yeah,
and,
so your view Everton should have relatively, I'm not say easier, but
I think they'll find it easier to stay up this season than in the previous 2 seasons, where they found themselves in a real scrap down at the bottom. I mean, on last season, it took a win on the last day of the season for them to stay up. This season, I think they'll be okay, though. I mean, on the game, you're looking at the statistics. I mean, Everton had 25 shots, 8 on target, to Bournemouth, who had 11 and 4. But on the balance of the game, I mean, if we look at try and find the expected goals for the game.
do you think they had reasonable?
I think it was probably pretty imbalanced, from what I understand. Just give me 1 second here. I mean, Everton 3.06 to Bournemouth's 0.82. So even those 11 shots, 4 on target from Bournemouth didn't really generate much, and Everton had an easy win in the end, and they deserved to win the game. Iriola, new Bournemouth manager, who apparently when he was at Spain, I think he was with Rayo Vallecano before. I could be wrong on that, but whoever he was with, he was very highly rated with them. But Premier League football is different. It's more physical than Spanish football, and he's going to have to learn that, and he's going to have to adapt his managing techniques to this Bournemouth side, who don't have the most talent in their squad, in order to keep them up for another season. Does he do that? I don't know. It will just be based on, can they just pick up enough points to keep themselves up out of those 4 that I think will be scrapping down at the bottom. One of them will stay up. Now they have the experience of staying up. They're the only non-promoted side out of those 4. So the experience could be enough for them in that squad to stay up, but it'd be difficult. I think it will be a struggle for them this season again. I guess the question now becomes of Iriola, because of how he started the season, how long until they start really questioning his position and think we're going to need to give him the sack. And no manager have obviously been sacked so far, but there will be one at some point soon. Who it is, I'm not sure, but there'll be a few of them. I don't think it will be Luton's. I don't think it will be any of Luton's managers. Luton's manager. I think the 3 that it could possibly be out of the teams down at the bottom would be Burnley. But I think Vincent Kompany stays for long enough because of his performances last season. I think the 2 that possibly could go will be either Sheffield, who are bottom of the Premier League on 1 point, or Bournemouth. Just because they have not looked good this season so far, Bournemouth, and they'll want to keep their Premier League spot after doing it last season. And in all fairness, a lot of people wrote them off, and they ended up staying up. And didn't really find themselves in a battle. In fact, they stayed up with quite a few games to go. But this season, it might be a little bit different for them. I thought that with the new manager, they might have kicked on a little bit and pushed on, but they just haven't been doing that. Whether they whether they're going to do it, I'm not so sure. But I mean, in all fairness, they have had some tough games to start this season, Bournemouth. But they haven't won a game yet. They're one of two teams alongside Sheffield without a win in the season yet, and they're above them purely based on the fact that they've drawn 3 games and have 3 points based on that. But I mean, one win for them changes the complexion of things down at the bottom. So I mean, I guess we'll see.
So do you want to go and speak
I think
about
we'll move on
Sheffield?
to the other games now. Sheffield lost to Fulham. Fulham, comfortable again at home, 3-1. Sheffield did find themselves level in the game at 1-1 in the second half. No goals in the first half, bit of a boring first half, and then Fulham take the lead through a good goal by Deckled over Reed, and then all of a sudden Sheffield find themselves level, and away from home, you think, can they hold out? And then 8 minutes later, there's a shot by which of the Fulham players was it? It was a shot by Tom Kearney from long range. In all fairness, really unlucky for Sheffield. It hits the bar and then rebound, and then as it's coming back out, hits the keeper on the back of it, on his back, and goes in. And it's a stroke of luck for Fulham, but for Sheffield, that'll be devastating for them, because they could have just picked up a point, which any points down at the bottom are important points, but a little bit unlucky, and then eventually go and lose the game. I mean, Fulham were a much best team though. I mean, they had 20 shots, 6 on target to only 5 and 2 from Sheffield. And again, if we're looking at the XG, Fulham 2.38 to Sheffield's 0.57. They just aren't scoring enough goals. Sheffield, they don't have the ability to score enough goals and that might be what sends them back down, because they've not been looking good so far this season.
And what about Fulham? How do you see?
I think Fulham will be comfortable again. I think there was some questions, especially if Paulinho had gone to Bayern. There would have been some real questions about how are they going to stay up. But again, there's just enough teams below them that aren't good enough that they'll, even if they're not particularly great this season, they'll stay up based on that everyone else below them is worse.
Right. Who else have we got?
We've got a couple more games to cover here. So to any of the fans who are listening who we haven't covered yet, I do apologise. It's only at this point in the video that we have. Wolves Villa, West Midlands derby. Pretty balanced game, I would say. Wolves, who I think a lot of people thought were going to really struggle this season with the loss of especially Ruben Neves, and then with the mess that they were in over the summer, and then Lopetegui walked, and they don't get why have I forgotten the name of the manager? Bournemouth's manager last season. Well, Bournemouth's manager that took over last season. His name has just completely gone from my head.
It doesn't matter. So, it's Mr. X. And then we'll figure out who it is.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm supposed to be the one who... Gary O'Neill. And Wolves have, after that City game last weekend where they upset them and they win the game, and they played really well against City. I think they played them as perfectly as a team at the bottom, a team that's not going to at least try and go toe-to-toe with City, can play them. And then this weekend against Villa, big game, a derby game for them, although not the derby for them, being that their main rivals are West Brom, who are still in the Championship. Same for Villa, their main rivals are Birmingham City. But a big game for both of them, and relatively even game. I would say. The first half was from just looking at it, not much happened, but the second half, really sprung to life. Wolves go into the lead through Huang, who scored his 5 games in a row at home that he scored in for them. So I think he became the first player since sometime in the 70s to do that for Wolves. So they're scoring some goals, Wolves, this season. After the start of the season, they were really struggling to put the ball in the back of the net. They are actually putting the ball in the back of the net, back of the net now. And they went 1-0 up, and then only a couple minutes later to be pegged back by Pau Torres' goal, who gets his first goal for Villa. Assist by Ollie Watkins, who has been on absolute fire for Villa so far this season. And ends up on as even at the end of it, although Villa could have won it at the end through a couple of chances after Wolves had Mario Lemina sent off in the 94th minute for a second yellow for a shirt tug, which was just really stupid. He just blatantly tugs the shirt of, I can't remember which Villa player it was, but blatantly tugs the shirt. The referee's going to give you a yellow for that 9 times out of 10. You don't get yourself sent off there. Get yourself suspended for a game now. And Villa could have nabbed it at the end, which would have been, glory for Villa, who then would have, had they won that game, they would have found themselves actually sat in the top 4. But for Villa, they've had a very, very good start to the season under Emery. I've been very impressed with them. They've had a lot of players performing at a very good level. They look like they have a strong squad. Now, I think the good thing for them is because they're in the Conference League, which isn't necessarily the most competitive competition, especially in the group stages, they can afford to play some weaker teams in midweek, which gives their players a little bit more rest, where if they were in the Europa League, you have to field a much stronger squad in those competitions, and they may then have those sort of weekend struggles. But the first half, they weren't particularly great. The second half, they were a lot better than Villa. I mean, both sides were a lot better in the second half, and I mean, I'd say a draw was relatively fair. However, though, Villa were robbed of a penalty towards the end of the game. Ollie Watkins threw on goal, shoved from behind, but because he still gets his shot off, I think that's the reason why the referee doesn't give it and the VAR look at it and don't give it. But he's clearly shoved from behind, a hand on his back, clearly sets him off balance while he's taking the shot. I mean, the shot he gets off, he's completely off balance. He falls over, mid taking the shot, and they should have been given a penalty. And I don't get it. If he had not got the shot, if he had decided to have just gone down there and not take the shot, they probably award a penalty, and Villa possibly have the opportunity to win the game. But it doesn't happen, and for them, they'll be frustrated at that they didn't get that penalty. But on the balance of it, I think a draw was probably fair for the most part of the game. However, VAR and referees again just not performing up to the level that they should be.
So for end of the season, so you see Villa having another good season.
Yeah, I think they'll challenge again for Europe.
What about Wolves?
Wolves, I think, will stay up. I think a lot of people said that they could find themselves in a struggle, but they've looked good so far this season, even in games that they're struggling to...
That's okay.
What is it?
No, that's okay.
What is it?
No, it's fine. I thought it was something else. I do apologize.
Oh, what is it? The time?
Yeah, at the time.
Oh, right. Okay. We'll get this finished off very soon because the next game was very boring as well. But as for both sides, I think Wolves will be fine. They'll probably find themselves finishing in the mid-table. Or if they are like 14th, 15th, they'll find themselves well off relegation. I don't think they'll be fine. And for Villa, I think the target for them will be Europa League. However, they had a very good start to the season. If they can keep it up for most of the game, they can find themselves finishing possibly 5th spot, which could get them Champions League football. As for the final game, Forest Palace, very boring, 0-0. I do apologise. We're not really going to speak too much about it because there weren't many chances in the game. I think Mateta had a good chance for Palace and Gibbs White had a good chance. However, there was one chance in the game for new signing for Forest. I forget his name. When I see his name, it will remind me of Murillo, who skipped past a few players, and if he had put it in the back of the net, possibly would have been goal of the season, but hits it almost straight at the keeper and actually did get a rebound, and the shot on the rebound, he then also hit straight to the keeper. But for that game, I mean, again, for both of their seasons, I mean, 0-0 on the balance of it wasn't a great game. Not many chances created. I mean, if we look at the XG of that game, Palace 0.98, Forest 1.31. So you probably say draw on. Forest outscored them by 0.33 on XG. Draw is probably fair result at the end of it, but had one of them just been able to put their chance in the back of the net, they could have won. They could have won the game. Again, both teams I think will be comfortably mid-table, stay up. So a draw for them. I think both of them will be okay with that. Position-wise on the table, Forest sat in 13th on 11 points, and Palace sat in 9th on 12 points. So.
Do you think there's going to be more or less where they're going to end up this season, sort of that?
Yeah, I think Palace, who, as long as they've been in the Premier League now, have never finished in the top half of the table, which is a strange thing. But the question for them is, can they finally finish in the top half of the table? Don't know.
Right.
But I mean, they'll be in that mid-table position. I think Forest will be as well. So unless any of them go on a particularly bad losing run, I don't see either of them finding themselves struggling this season. They'll both comfortably stay up again, which is maybe a little bit boring for both of them because you don't get the nervousness of a relegation scrap, but you don't get the excitement of trying to push on towards European football. They'll both be sort of just in the middle, which I'm sure they'll be happy with, but from for a team like Palace, can imagine now it's getting a little bit boring for them because they've been in the league so long. You'd think that maybe eventually because of all that money that they've been having for the past 10 years, they can just invest it and they can get themselves up the table, maybe just have like a season or two in Europe, but they haven't been able to do that. They haven't even been able to crack the top 10. So, yeah.
Right. So where do you want to go now?
Finish off. Obviously, no, there won't be an episode next week because international football. So we'll be back in 2 weeks' time for another Premier League roundup of fixtures. But before we leave, I think we'll do our predictions again. So I'll go in order of the games. So the first game on Saturday is Merseyside derby, Liverpool at home to Everton. Predictions?
It's going to be probably 3-1 to Liverpool.
3-1 to Liverpool. Yeah, I mean, I maybe see Everton getting a goal, but I mean, 3-1 sounds about. I'll go with. I think if Liverpool will blow them out of the water. I think they'll win 4-1. Next up, Bournemouth at home to Wolves. Really important game for Bournemouth at home to Wolves, who they could get a result against, and they need to get some points. But I don't think they'll get a win. However, I do think it will be a draw. I think it will finish 1-1.
I don't know. And somehow I think Wolves is going to do better than Bournemouth. Although I know they're playing away. I think they're going to win 1-0.
1-0. Okay. Next up, Brentford Burnley. Now Brentford have struggled for points so far this season, although I think they'll be okay. They have a good enough manager and they have good enough players. Burnley away to Brentford. They haven't been as good at home this season, Brentford. In all honesty, they were, a few minutes away from getting 10 points and would have been mid-table, but they find themselves, I think, sat down in like 15th or 16th for now. I think 15th above Everton. But they're at home to Burnley, who have really struggled to defend this season. I think it will continue that way. I think Brentford will win comfortably. I think they'll win a 2-0.
I think they're going to win, but 1-0.
Okay. Then next up, City, who for the first time since December of 2018 lost 2 consecutive games in the Premier League, which an incredible record. If you look at all other teams, the next team to have not lost consecutive... Now, the longest record for not losing consecutive games in the Premier League is actually Brighton, who haven't lost consecutive games since last year, since, I think, October 2022, which is just an attest to the work that De Zerbi is doing at Brighton now. City at home to Brighton. And, maybe with a little bit of confidence lost with City, they'll want to get back on track. It's one of those games that they could either come out Brighton... and they could blow Brighton out the water, or if Brighton play really well, they could find themselves in a bit of trouble Brighton being a pretty good side. I, however, do think that City will get over the line. I don't think it will be the easiest game, but I'll go for a 2-1 City.
And don't forget, I think City's gonna go back.
They'll be having Rodri back.
Rodri back, and so
who's so important for them. I mean, if you look at the games that they don't have Rodri and the games that they do have Rodri, I mean, they played way more games with Rodri, and they've, I think, only lost about 5 in the games that he played. And the games they haven't played with Rodri, which isn't many, they've actually lost more games than in all the games they've had with him. So he's arguably their most important player on the pitch. I think the thing is they have no real replacement for him. They have no player who can play his position. They have to go with like 2 players playing the DM role rather than just having one single player playing the DM role, which is part of the reason why they wanted Declan Rice in the summer. They decided not to go beyond that first bid that they made for him because they didn't want to get into a bidding war, and I think they knew that Declan Rice wanted to go to Arsenal. But that's part of the reason why Pep wanted Declan Rice. But he'll be back, so I think they will get a win. But I think Brighton will give them a little bit of trouble at least.
I think just going to be a bit optimistic, and I think there's the chance of a draw.
I mean, I do think it's possible. I just think City, after 2 losses in a row, they'll just be like, yeah, we're not dropping points the next game.
But I think, I'm going to be optimistic. It's going to be a 1-1.
Okay. I mean, I'd happily take that. I just don't think it will happen. Moving on then, Newcastle against Palace. Newcastle at home to Palace. I think this will be a pretty routine win for Newcastle.
Don't you think it's just a question of how many goals they're going to put behind?
Yeah, I mean, Palace are decent defensively, so I don't think it will be I don't think there'll be a rout by any means of it. But let's see Palace getting a goal. I'll go 3-1 Newcastle.
I'll go 3-0.
Okay, and then moving on, Forest at home to Luton. I mean, it's somewhat of an opportunity for Luton, but Forest are very good at home. I think they'll continue to be good at home, and they'll win this game 2-0.
I'm going to surprise this because I think Luton somewhat can win this game, and I think they're going to win 1-0.
You think they're going to win?
Yeah.
They'll steal it on the road 1-0. Fair
Yeah.
enough. And then two late games on the Saturday. One evening kickoff, 5:30. We've got Arsenal away at Chelsea, who now Stamford Bridge recently for us in the past 3 games we've won all 3 games in the league at Stamford Bridge. Although I do think it will be harder than it was against them last season at Stamford Bridge in a game that I know we only won 1-0, but we could have easily won 2 or 3-0. Like we could have easily put a few goals past them. They do look defensively quite solid, so I think they'll be difficult to break down. However, I think attacking wise, they'll struggle because of our defensive capabilities. They may struggle, and I think we'll win the game. Albeit, I think we'll only win it 1-0.
I'm going to go for 1-0 as well because I agree with what you said.
I think they'll give us a decent game, but they just won't. I think they'll get into some good positions. They just won't create really much. And then we'll probably just have a little bit more quality in front of goal and get the win. And then there's an 8 p.m. Saturday kickoff, which is really late for a Saturday. And that's Sheffield at home to United. Now, because of United's poor start to the season, you're thinking for Sheffield, they have to be going into that game thinking, maybe we can get something out of this. We're at home, in front of our home crowd. Against a United team who have looked mentally maybe a little bit weak. Can we get something against them? And my answer to that is that I think they will, but I think it will be a draw. I think it will be... I'm going to be boring here. I think it will be 0-0.
So now I think Man U is going to win. And
I mean, look, United should be winning.
But
I think
it's going to be a 2-0.
A 2-0
for Man U.
Enough. And then only one Sunday game, and that's Villa at home to West Ham. Actually, a pretty good clash between 2 teams that have had good starts to the season. Villa are at home though. Villa Park is a tough place to go for teams, and I think for that reason Villa will get a result. Although I do think again West Ham will give them a good game. I'd go 2-1 Villa.
I got 1-1.
1-1. Okay. And then only one Monday game. Spurs at home to Fulham. I know Spurs will be missing Basuma, but I think they're not coming up against a big enough test that could cause them any damage. And I think they'll maybe struggle at parts in the game, but I think they'll get over the line. I think they'll create enough chances and they'll win 2-0.
Although I dislike the thought of that, but I agree with you. They're going to win. They're going to find it relatively easy to win. So, yeah, 2-0 as well.
Yeah, okay. I think that that rounds everything up for us for this episode. Now, again, bit of a break until the next one. But when it does come around, we'll record it and put it out as soon as we can.
Yeah, and what we may do next time is review what we said, predictions, and see how.
Yeah. I think I'll go back and I'll listen to the end of this and see how our results came out. I mean, we might be able to do a little bit of a thing of, we can set up a bit of a league between us two every week to see who predicts the correct score line. You get like 3 points for it, and if you predict the sort of right result, either a win or a draw, you get 1 point for it. And then obviously if you don't predict it right, you get no points for it.
I quite like that.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, so thank you everyone for either watching or listening to another episode of the Teaching My Dad Football podcast. I hope you've enjoyed.
And hopefully I've improved, but we'd never know.
Maybe step by step. We'll see the incremental improvements. Maybe by the end of the season, he'll know more than me.
I don't think so, but there you go.
See you guys. Thank you.